And, to be honest, most people aren't even aware that strategies like these exist, like we said at the beginning. So the fact that we're here educating people about this strategy is an incredible thing. But you're absolutely right. The time value of money is really the play here more than anything else, right? It is to a certain extent kicking the can down the road. But look, the truth is, most real estate, people who are in real estate, who are making a lot of money, who are growing their wealth over a long period of time, are doing it using these strategies, because the more money of your own that you can use to reinvest, the compound interest that can be created through that over time, as opposed to not paying the taxes, will help you to grow that portfolio at a much faster rate.
My name is Rodman Schley. As a real estate expert, I've invested millions of dollars in vacation properties all around the world, and I've been involved in the valuation of billions of dollars of properties. I want to share my 35 years of experience along with vacation home investment tips from the top minds in the short-term vacation rental industry. Now, let's do the work. Hey everybody, welcome to the Vacation Property Seekers Podcast. I'm your host, Rodman Schley, and today we're joined by Yonah Weiss, who is a powerhouse with property owners' tax savings. As business director at Madison Specs, a national cost segregation leader, he's assisted clients in saving over $1 billion on taxes through cost segregation. Yonah is a real estate investor and the host of the top podcast, Wise Advice, where his background in teaching and passion for real estate and helping others really shines through. Yonah, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
We're going to talk a lot about cost segregation today. And a lot of people might be like, oh my gosh, that's the most boring topic on the planet. But it could save you so much money if you really know how to execute it and know how to work it. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the fundamentals behind cost segregation. Some people might have heard of it. Some people might not have. Some people might have heard of it, but just don't quite understand it, which is pretty common for cost segregation because it's a little bit, some complexity to it, if you will. But maybe you can talk a little bit about your background and how you got into cost segregation.
Sure. And you're absolutely right, first of all, that it is a bit of a complicated topic. I try to do my best to simplify it, and really my background, how I got into it. I was a teacher for about 15 years. And so my background really comes from that education standpoint, where I'm just trying to share with my students, in this case, anyone who's willing to listen, really, the power of this tax strategy. Well, as I said, about 15 years into teaching, I realized it wasn't really paying very much, and I still had student debt, and I was growing a bigger family, and I have 6 kids. So at that time, my youngest was a newborn, and I said to myself, well, I need to figure something else out. And I just kind of put myself out there, and that's where real estate came up. And this was a little about 10 years ago, where I started to get into real estate in various different forms. First started out with working with a friend of mine doing commercial mortgages, hard money loans. Then we did a few fix and flips. I got my broker's license. So I was really kind of dipping my feet into every aspect of real estate that I could. But what the biggest part of it was the networking, was, who you met and what came from that, and opportunities came about. And that's really where this opportunity to work for Madison Specs, the biggest national cost seg company at the time, and still is, that came to me. And so it was really an opportunity. I knew nothing about cost segregation at the time. However, to my surprise, neither did anyone else that I asked about the subject. And really, to me, that was like a big light bulb, having that teaching background. I was like, wait a second, almost nobody knows about this. And what's stopping people from using this incredible tax strategy was simply the lack of knowledge or understanding of the subject. So that's a little background, like how I got into it.
Yeah, and cost segregation hasn't been around that long. I mean, it's a little bit of time, but it hasn't been around that long. And so it is new for a lot of people, or people who have been investing for a long time. And of course, when you get it into your portfolio, you bring in these properties, you really want to understand the cost seg side, because if you don't, you're leaving money on the table. Like you said, it's a tax strategy that could be so good for you. Can you give people just a little bit of an idea of the basic fundamentals behind cost segregation?
Sure. So it's an advanced form of depreciation. So essentially, when you buy a property, besides for your primary residence, doesn't matter if it's commercial or residential, right? Obviously, we're talking about short-term rentals over here on the show, which is a huge asset class when it comes to cost seg. We'll get into specific reasons why that later, but depreciation is a income tax deduction that everyone gets to take because you bought a property, right? And it doesn't actually mean that your property is going down in value, like the name, like depreciation. You would think that's what it means. It's a borrowed term, and it's the name of a tax write-off that allows you to take a deduction of the property value every single year, spread out over a long period of time, 27 and a half or 39-year period. Cost segregation comes in and says, well, actually, the property is made up of different components. It's not just all lumped into one bucket. We can actually break down the property, segregate, if you will, the cost of the property into different buckets, different categories that depreciate on different schedules or different lifespans. And the process of doing that, it's an engineering process, kind of breaking down the property into its components and then showing which of those depreciate on a 5 or 15-year schedule as opposed to those longer 27 and a half or 39-year schedules. And so that's essentially what cost segregation does. It's a cash flow mechanism, essentially, because we're showing how you can take bigger deductions during the earlier years of ownership, which in turn creates a bigger cash flow for you to then reinvest, buy more properties, reinvest into your own properties, et cetera.
And that's kind of like the philosophy of my hot water heater is going to depreciate at a different rate than my roof, and my roof's going to depreciate at a different uh, rate than my furnace. And there's all these different pieces in your home that they depreciate at different levels, so they start to wear out at different levels, right? So we're going to take the depreciation right up front.
Correct. Yeah. And the funny thing is, it's really a borrowed term because it's not intrinsic necessarily to the actual lifespan of that furnace or that roof per se, because it's completely subjective to you as the owner. So when you buy a property, it doesn't matter that the property was built in 1922. You get to start depreciating it on that 39-year schedule starting today. And all of the components inside of it that would depreciate on a 5-year schedule doesn't matter that they've been in the property for 10 years already and essentially have no quote unquote value to them from that perspective. It starts over brand new when you, the new owner, takes ownership of it. And so it really is a borrowed term, but you're absolutely right. The principle of these different components are certain things, right, have a shorter lifespan. And so that's where the principle where we are assigning those lifespans to it to then depreciate and then take those as a tax deduction.
Yeah, and you mentioned it's not like the property is losing value. It's not like your property is depreciating. Now, but at the end of that, say you get to the exit strategy, you get to the end, you are still going to have to put that back in, right? You're going to have to add that depreciation that you took out over that time period into account on your sales price, correct?
There is something called depreciation recapture tax, and it is an extremely misunderstood aspect of the depreciation. And I hear this all the time, especially on forums and bigger pockets and things like that, where people talk about it. It sounds like recapture means we're paying it back, right? That's what it
Mm.
sounds like, right? I took depreciation. Now, when you sell, you have to pay it back. What you said, Robin, is a little more accurate. That it is added back as a gain. So essentially, the amount of depreciation taken as a deduction during the life of ownership is now added back, and we're going to be taxed on that amount. So being taxed on, let's say you took $100,000 of depreciation deductions during the lifespan of, the property, paying it $100,000 back is a much different than being taxed on $100,000, where it's going to be maxed out usually at about a 25%. And so that's a huge difference. The other thing, which is really important to note about depreciation recapture, is being subject to a tax is not the same thing as paying tax. Because just because you are going to be subject to that tax upon the sale, there are many strategies that you can employ to either defer or deduct or completely eliminate that recapture tax upon the sale. And so with the right strategy, with the right tax, strategist, a CPA who's on your team who can advise you what you should be doing. Should I be doing a 1031 exchange to then further defer that recapture tax along with the capital gain? Should I be, doing a cost seg on a new property, taking bonus depreciation and then wiping out that recapture tax from the depreciation from another property? There are a lot of strategies, and those are just two that I mentioned. But yes, it definitely is important to note that there is such a thing called recapture tax, and it can come as a surprise if you don't plan correctly for it.
Yeah, so you're kicking the can down the road a little bit when it comes to taxes, but it's also freeing up that cash flow right now. So when I'm getting those gains right now, instead of paying taxes out, I get that deduction. I can take and I can utilize that capital. I can make further investments. I can go out and make money on my money instead of sending it to Uncle Sam for a while, knowing that eventually they're going to have to. There's going to come that time when I'm going to get that gain or I'm going to have that gain. But like you said, a good 1031 exchange strategy or some of these other strategies, you could really, really uh, move that time period out and out and out in terms of the tax liability.
100%. And, to be honest, most people aren't even aware that strategies like these exist, like we said at the beginning. So the fact that we're here educating people about this strategy is an incredible thing. But you're absolutely right. The time value of money is really the play here more than anything else, right? It is to a certain extent kicking the can down the road. But the truth is, most real estate, people who are in real estate who are making a lot of money, who are growing their wealth over a long period of time, are doing it using these strategies, because the more money of your own that you can use to reinvest, the compound interest that can be created through that over time, as opposed to not paying the taxes, will help you to grow that portfolio at a much faster rate.
Well, and I think, a lot of the, if you think about people who invest in vacation properties, now, a lot of those people are not professional investors, right? They want to
Correct.
buy that property, they want to rent it, they want to get some gains back from it, but they're not thinking about cost segregation. They're not thinking about tax strategies. They're just thinking,
Mhm.
hey, I just want to generate some revenue into the
Right.
property, have somebody else paying my mortgage, paying for my utility bills. And at the end of the day, I got a nice place I can go to. But I think that's some of the money, some of the biggest money that's left on the table is from those people who are not considering themselves to be like a sophisticated investor. Where if you just take a little bit of time and I know it's overwhelming too. It's like when you talk about cost segregation, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know what that is. I don't know what I have to
Right.
do. I don't know where to go. But man, why wouldn't people just go out and get a professional to help them understand that strategy, help them execute on that strategy, and then maybe not just have one vacation home, but maybe get into the next one and then start maximizing a portfolio.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think when people hear taxes or anything related to taxes, most people, like, their brains shut off, right? Like, I don't know. I have a CPA, like, deals with that. I don't know. But when it comes to real estate and taxes, some of the most powerful ways to grow your wealth is through the tax strategies, including cost seg and things like that come along with it. So a little bit of education really does go a long way. And I've seen firsthand, literally hundreds of people who have, invested in short-term rentals specifically, who have been able to grow their wealth. Many people who have been able to retire either themselves or both spouses from a couple because of the revenue and the tax savings they're creating. The after tax savings are greater than they were making at high, earning W-2 jobs just from owning a few short-term rentals. So there is a lot of potential there, but it does take some time. It does take a little bit of, education and putting yourself out there to be vulnerable, to know, hey, there's things that I don't know and I'm willing to learn and find professionals that can help me get there.
Yeah. And so, Yona, if I'm sitting there, if I've got a property, let's say that I've already owned a property, I've owned it for 5, 10 years, can those people still go out and get a cost seg study and still take that depreciation after owning it for a period of time?
You can, yeah, absolutely. There is no statute of limitations or anything like that, with regards to how far back you can go. When you go a little further back, there's less benefit the further you go back, just because what we're doing at cost segregation is we are front loading certain portions of depreciation. And if the total depreciation lifespan is a 39-year for short-term rentals, which it is, then the more time you have, the less total depreciation we can take from or we can pull from. So you imagine, like, this pool of potential deductions that is there, and every year we're taking a little bit, right, with just regular straight line depreciation. Well, if you own a property for 10 years, you've taken already 25% of your total deductions just from that straight line depreciation. So you have less to work with. But we can go back. You don't need to amend any previous year's tax returns in order to do it. What we do is just catch up the missed depreciation, and you can take this year. Usually, what happens is you get like a big lump sum because there's a lot of missed depreciation that you
Mm.
could have taken during those previous years.
Yeah. And so, Yona, if you think about just your primary residence versus say like a vacation home. Now, I couldn't go and do a cost seg on my residence, correct? How do they
Correct.
differentiate that in the tax world between say that vacation property and your personal residence?
So depreciation is specifically a deduction for rental properties, right? So it does not apply to your primary residence. However, if you have a second home or a vacation home, that's also taken into consideration if you do rent it out, right? If you rent it out, it is still considered a rental property, but there is a condition. And the condition says like this: either if you stay in the property for more, either 14 days or more during the year, or 10% of the total rented time. So if you stay in there, let's say you rent the property for 200 days out of the year, you can still go there to vacation 20 days out of the year. And it's still considered a full rental property, even though you're spending either 10% of the time or 14 days, whichever is greater. Now, if you do spend more than that time, it is still considered a rental property. You can still claim depreciation, just not the full amount, which means it's going to be prorated. There's a calculation to kind of figure out how much time of it is a rental, property versus how much time is personal use. And so you have to subtract that amount. It does get a little complicated when you're spending more time, but it's certainly feasible to, to have a vacation rental where you are spending time there and also claiming it as a full rental property.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Vacation Property Seekers podcast. I want to let you know about one question that I get all the time, and that's how do I forecast my cash flow and my profitability when investing in a vacation home? Now, if you've ever wondered that or you know somebody who has, you're in the right place. We've created a free training called Financial Forecasting for Maximum Vacation Home Profitability. Now, in this training, we're going to guide you step by step on how to accurately project rental income, estimate your operating expenses, and calculate your returns so you can make informed investment decisions.
You can access the free training at vacationpropertyexpertnetwork.com. So if you're ready to dive deeper into financial fundamentals and maximize your profitability, visit vacationpropertyexpertnetwork.com. Yeah. And, it's kind of interesting too. I know a lot of people are going to be sitting there going, well, what do I do? Or how do I do this? Or how do again, it's such a big process that even, and I've known, and I've worked with cost seg for quite a while, in my appraisal company. So we do a lot of stuff. We work with a lot of cost seg comps, but a lot of people just don't understand where to start. Like, how do I go out and get one? Do I have to get a study done? Do I have to have somebody come out? What is it going to cost me? Those are some of the questions that people are going to come up with. I'm curious on your answer to that.
Of course, absolutely. And it is pretty similar to having an appraisal done on a property because it is a very detailed kind of report or study of the property. But the first step, which is the easiest part, is we offer a free upfront estimate and analysis to show what the potential tax savings would be as well as what the cost would be. So, for example, short-term rentals currently at the time of this recording, I don't want to get in trouble if the price goes up in a year or two from now when someone's listening to this, but at the time of this recording, typically we're charging about $3,000. For some larger vacation rentals, can be up to $4,000, but typically $3,000 is our flat fee. And it doesn't matter if you bought it for $1 million or you bought it for $5 million property or $100,000 for that matter. It's a flat fee, and the truth of the matter is, any property purchased for over, I would say, $200,000 is almost a no-brainer to do a cost seg on. And we show that in our analysis. We've done well over 35,000 of these across the country in all asset classes. So our primary, I think, focus is more on the commercial end of thing. We've done several thousand cost segs on short-term rentals and single families and that kind of asset class as well. But I still would say like 80 to 90% of our business is still in that the commercial space, which can get a little more expensive. The bigger the property is, can go a little higher than that. But that's simple, right? Reach out, you get a free estimate. It's educational more than anything else. And I offer free consultations as well. So if someone wants to have someone who has that kind of ability to walk you through the process and walk you through the steps, as well as what do those numbers make sense? Like, I don't understand numbers and spreadsheets and things like that. It's not for everyone, but we try to simplify it as much as possible so ahead of time what it's going to look like.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating because it's so, like, again, a lot of people hear cost seg and they kind of hear a little bit about how it works, and it's just like drinking from a fire hose. It's kind of like, or even the appraisal process is very similar, like you were saying. People don't really understand the valuation side of things, and that's kind of the same thing with short-term vacation rentals. A lot of people are buying based on emotion instead of buying on fundamentals or buying on cash flows or understanding cost segs. So for me, it's always so important that people, number one, not only learn about these different fundamentals, but have at least the basis there, have at least the basic fundamental knowledge that you need to at least have a conversation with somebody like you, who I can come in and go, okay, let's look at the cost seg. This is what I've got going on. Let's get a study done. Let's bring it in. Let's see what those tax savings are going to be. And you mentioned that. What kind of tax savings do people typically look at? I know that's kind of a big question depending on the property and such, but when
Sure.
you're talking about vacation homes, what kind of tax savings do people see?
It does depend. Every home is going to be different, whether you're dealing with a condo or a townhome or a beachfront property. There are really so many different variables because what we're doing, again, is a component depreciation. We're breaking down the property and showing what the different components depreciate on. So if you have land improvements, which depreciate faster on a 15-year schedule, like a swimming pool or a patio or even concrete, landscaping, fencing, all of that's going to come into play and is going to add to the benefit of the value. But just kind of rule of thumb, I would say about 20 to 30% of your purchase price is going to come back as accelerated depreciation amount.
Mm,
Now, 2025, we've just recently reinstituted a law that's called 100% bonus depreciation, which allows for any of the cost seg accelerated depreciation schedules, like the 5-year or the 15-year schedules, allowed to take 100% of those deductions in the first year. That means $1 million property, if you're taking 20 to 30%, just keep it like very simple. 20%, that's $200,000. So you buy $1 million property. And again, it's based on the purchase price, not on how much money you put into it. So you may only put down, 20% and get back a $200,000 deduction in the first year. It's pretty powerful. And those numbers do go up, proportionate to how expensive the property is.
yeah. And so, Yona, I'm thinking about my international listeners who have international investments. Now, they can't probably do a cost seg, right? And write that off just because their property is located outside of the United States.
Well, technically, if they are a US taxpayer, then they can do a cost segregation. They can claim depreciation, even if the property itself is outside of the US. It
Hmm.
has slightly different rules. The depreciation rules is on something called ADS, the alternative depreciation schedule. So it's not eligible for the bonus depreciation. However, you still could do cost segregation, just a little bit different lifespans. But typically not really going to be worth it unless it's a more expensive property, just because again the bonus depreciation is not there. So you'll have to run the numbers, but certainly can be do again if you are a U.S. taxpayer, since it is depreciation is specifically a U.S. In the U.S. tax code, does not apply to other countries' tax codes. But if you it's definitely worthwhile to look into if that is the case.
Are there anything, is there anything coming up on, say, the horizon? I know we've got a new set of politics in place right now as of this podcast, and I would think that the current administration would be pretty friendly toward investment, just knowing the background of the person in office. But in terms of on the horizon, are there any big changes coming? Is there anything that we're looking at that might get passed and might be changing the way that we take cost segregation into account?
I don't see anything on the horizon per se because we just had a huge tax reform bill passed just on July 4th of 2025. The big beautiful tax bill had in it this 100% bonus depreciation, which was
Mm,
brought back and made permanent, by the way, for 2025 going forward, which means that was when it was originally passed back in 2017 in the first Trump tax bill. It was sunsetted, meaning it only applied through 2022
mm.
and then started to phase out to lower depreciation amounts. However, now that it's back and permanent, it's huge. And I definitely see that having a huge change as I did back in 2017 and 2018. It was a huge push for cost seg because of the bonus depreciation. Going forward, again, I don't know that there's other plans going forward since there was such a big bill passed just now. I definitely hope that interest rates will drop as well because that's obviously going to play a big factor in terms of how to profit from real estate investments.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I think we're gonna need to get some things settled in terms of some of these tariff claims and some of these other things that are moving parts. I know that there's still the Fed's still worried about, of course, inflation a little bit because of the tariff talk and such. But I'm with you. It'll be great when we get some. And by the way, our interest rates, we're so spoiled. They're not that high.
That's true.
I mean, they're high
Relatively
compared to
speaking.
what we were dealing with maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. But overall, they're actually pretty reasonable and pretty realistic. But we're so used to that 3 to 4% interest rate climate. I mean, a little before my time. I don't want to date myself too much, but my dad still tells me about those 16% interest rates during the
Right.
Carter era back in the 70s. Or, we talk about even when I first got into kind of the real estate space. I mean, you're still talking about a 10% interest rate when you're buying properties. We're what, maybe six to, no more than seven right now, probably closer to
Right.
six, but we've got it pretty good, but 3% would be even better.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's all relative.
Exactly. So, what would you tell people in terms of if they're thinking about cost seg? So they're sitting there, they're hearing things. Of course, reaching out to you, getting that. I love the fact that you're going to give them that first analysis. I can give you an analysis, give you an idea what your savings could be, and then you can decide. Hey, do I want to take that $3,000 shot and see what we can do to see if I can reduce that tax rate? But if they're out there sitting, what should they be looking for in firms and people to really see they can get somebody who really understands what they're doing with cost seg?
I think another important point is having a CPA that understands this. And
Mm,
unfortunately, that's something overlooked by most people because if you're not in full time in the real estate, it's very likely that your CPA is also not real estate focused, which means they may be overlooking strategies like this or simply put may even not understand it. And believe me, because I've spoken to literally thousands of CPAs over the years, and most of them, I can say confidently, do not understand cost segregation. And some of them are willing to learn and some of them are not. And so if you do want to learn about, and it's not some foreign thing, this is directly in the tax code. That's what's most surprising about it because it's something written by the IRS, governed by the IRS. There's something called the cost segregation audit techniques guide, which is on the IRS's website. But just there are CPAs that are kind of in their boxes, in their zones. They're there just to kind of punch numbers and fill out spreadsheets, but not there necessarily to advise, and certainly not there to come up with being proactive in different strategies to help you save money. So one of the biggest things I would recommend is looking into a CPA who does understand real estate, definitely does understand short-term rentals, because as I alluded to earlier, there is a specific rule about short-term rentals that actually allows for even more benefit with cost segregation than other types of properties. So that's the first thing I would say. That's really, really important team member to have.
yeah, and I think about how much money we all probably leave on the table because we don't have a really good CPA who doesn't have
Uh-huh.
a full picture of everything that we do, who we are, how we invest. And if you think about that globally, I mean, it's probably staggering to think about the amount of tax dollars that don't get saved because we don't have the right people in our boat.
It is staggering. That's a good word for it. Tom Wheelwright wrote a book called Tax Free Wealth, and I highly recommend that if anyone wants to learn a little bit more about tax strategies, especially when it comes to real estate. And he says in there in his chapter on depreciation, which he calls the king of all deductions, he says there the reason why it's not mandatory to do a cost segregation, which because the IRS actually considers it the correct way to depreciate your property, but
Mm,
they don't require it to be done. And they said, simply put, it's a combination of, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the laziness and ignorance of individuals and their CPAs,
mm,
which just adds more revenue to the U.S. Treasury. Because the more, like you said, so much money is being left on the table. You could be saving money. You could be growing your portfolio. You could be paying less taxes. And it's simply just not knowing what's out there. And frankly, not knowing what you don't know. And listening to podcasts like this and just educating yourself is the first step in that process.
yeah. So Yona, just to wrap up a little bit here. Number one, I want people to be able to find you. It's kind of one of those things where it's like if you find that gem who really understands cost seg, I want to make sure that people can find you. So where do they need to go to find the best place to get a hold of you?
The best place I would say is on social media. I'm very active. You can go to my website, yonahweiss.com, but I'm extremely active on platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, X. So just send me a DM. Don't just hit that follow button. I don't like to have a lot of followers. I like to have, personal connections. So take 10 seconds and write a little note that you heard us on this podcast and be happy to connect that way.
And Yonah, I'm going to put that in the show notes. I know in case somebody can't spell your name, I'll put it in the show notes to make sure that they can find you. And then just the last question. I think I know what your answer is going to be on this, but if you're a new investor coming in, you're trying to buy some vacation homes. If you think about that person, you give them one piece of your best advice coming out of the gates for them, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, I'd say twofold. Number one, be humble. Know that there are many things that you don't know, as we talked about. There are a lot of things you have to learn, and continue to educate yourself. Which, if you can find a mentor, if you can find someone that is 5 or 10 or 15 years ahead of you, and see, hey, that's where I would like to be in 5 years from now. See if you can partner up with someone who's already learned from their own mistakes, and that's probably the best way and fastest way to learn.
Love it. Yonah, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's been a pleasure, Robin. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Vacation Property Secrets podcast. If you enjoyed the show, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. By leaving a review, you not only support the show, but you also help others find and enjoy it just like you did. Also, please share this episode with somebody who could benefit from it. And if you're aiming to build a short-term vacation rental investment business that's based on strong investment fundamentals and not just emotion, I'd love to invite you to a free training that I'm hosting. It's my financial forecasting for maximum vacation home profitability training, an on-demand video course that's completely free. It walks you through the investment fundamentals to build and scale your short-term vacation rental business. You'll also learn how to estimate investment income and your operating expenses to build a projected pro forma operating statement and the potential NOI and return on investment for your property. Just go to vacationpropertyexpertnetwork.com to get access to your free training. We'll see you next week for another episode of the Vacation Property Secrets podcast.